Hello, friends. We are in the last week of March, and I hope that everyone's spring breaks have gone well if you have already had yours. I know when we lived in Indiana, ours weren't usually until April sometimes. So if you're those few that are waiting it out and waiting your turn, I feel you. You've got this. Welcome to the Grow My Business podcast, where we talk about all things sales, marketing, and how to fit it all in small business as women, moms, entrepreneurs, and business owners. I'm your host, Lindsay Fletcher, and if you haven't already, please hit that follow button on your podcast player app so that you don't miss an episode. It seriously blesses me big time to see this show reaching more and more women in small business. So I can't thank you enough for being here, and I really hope that you get something out of today's episode. I want to dive right into today's topic because I am all fired up about this one. Today, we're going to talk about cold calling and a couple of big mistakes that you want to avoid when you're cold calling, cold messaging, cold visiting, cold emailing, cold DMing, whatever type of cold reach outs that you're doing. I get at least one email a day pitching to be a guest on this podcast. Usually it's some type of an agent type of person that's representing another person who wants to be on my show or they think they might be a good fit. And these emails range from short and sweet to what feels like a novel about the other person that they're pitching. Sometimes they're pitching themselves, which is totally fine, whatever. That's not the point. But do you know what 99% of these people miss? They miss being prepared, and they miss knowing something about me and this podcast before they start pitching themselves. So here's how it typically goes down. I'm not even kidding. I get at least one of these a day, if not one or two a day. And it is consistent in how people are showing up in my email. And these are cold. I don't know these people. They've found my podcast somewhere, I don't know, on social media or in the podcast player app or something. But here's how it typically goes down. They read the title of my show, and maybe some of them read the description of the show, and then they go straight into pitching themselves. Their emails usually start with something like, "Hey, Lindsay, I love what you're doing on Grow My Business for Women in Business, and I think that I would be a perfect guest for your audience," or "so-and-so would be the perfect guest." And then the email goes straight into pitching themselves and all about how they will be great for my audience here on this show. But here's the mistake that they're making. They haven't listened to my podcast, or read more than a couple of show titles, or maybe the beginning of the description of the show, and they really don't know what problems that I talk about on the show. They skip all of that, and they go straight into pitching themselves. This is a big mistake that people make all the time in sales, is they don't find out any information, they don't ask any questions, and then they go straight into pitching their product or service. They don't know that I've removed social media from my phone. They don't know that I'm building a community of women that want to take back their time, that they want to implement sales and marketing strategies that actually work for them, and that these women, you as my listeners, want to work less, and you want to stop hustling and grinding and working 24/7, and you want to learn how to sell your products and services well. You want to solve problems. You want to serve your communities. And I teach women how to do that in person, over the phone, or in DMs or emails through conversation skills, through improving your conversation skills. The people that cold call or cold email, I guess I shouldn't say it cold call, it's not technically a call, they email me, they cold email me. They don't know that I'm a recovering hustle culture junkie and that I had a career before this podcast and before my sales consulting business. They literally know nothing about me. And they want me to buy, and you can't see my hands, I'm using air quotes, that they would be a great guest on my show. Now, listen, I am not opposed to having guests on my show. And in fact, I do have some episodes lined up with guests that you will hear in future episodes. But they literally skip over what is perhaps the most important part of sales, and that is preparing before the cold call or the cold email or the cold visit or DM. It's the preparation that you do beforehand that counts. Now, I'm not perfect, and I'm sure that I've come across this way in the past too. I'm not I'm not pointing anybody out. I'm not going to give you names of the people that are emailing me, but hopefully not anytime recent have I made these mistakes. Let me tell you what they should have done first. They should have listened to a few episodes of my podcast, and they would know that I am anti-hustle culture. They would know that having conversations and asking more questions and doing your due diligence is important in the sales process. And they should have visited my website. And perhaps, shameless plug here, perhaps they should have already joined my Women in Business community. Yep, I said it. Join my Women in Business community. Links in the show notes. But I get pitched a lot from men wanting to be a guest on the podcast. And I find it very ironic that they didn't pick up that this show is for women, hosted by a woman. Now, do I think that we can learn from men? Absolutely, yes, and amen. But they didn't go back through my episodes to see if I've ever had a man on the show, and I haven't. And it's not because I don't think that men can contribute to this space, but it's because I haven't had more than a couple of guests in the past on this show. And they don't even ask if I would like to consider having guests in the future because they don't even acknowledge that I haven't had that many in the past. And then they definitely don't tell me how they're going to contribute to my female listeners from a man's perspective. The mistake they're making is not preparing for the cold call and not asking any questions to get into conversation with me about who my target audience is and how I serve you as my listeners to better understand before they start pitching themselves with all the ways that they can serve you, my favorite listeners, my people, through my show. And they just go straight into the pitch. And that's something that gives sales a bad rap. So here's how you're going to avoid making these mistakes in your business. First of all, you're going to prepare. And then second of all, you're going to remind yourself that you are a human being first, and there is a human being on the other side of this initial conversation. And you're going to do those two things before you send a message, before you stop by a business, knock on a door, send an email, or DM someone. Remember that sales is all about solving problems. And if you don't know anything about them or who they serve, how can you solve their problems? Well, you can't. You can't, right? That's what I preach on here, is you can't solve problems if you don't ask any questions. So let's back the train up just a bit and let's do a little bit of homework. You want to find them on social media. You want to figure out who they are, what problems they might be having. You want to Google them. Where do they live? Where else do they shop? Put them through your ideal client filter before you talk to them or before you reach out to them. You might be able to find some common ground of you maybe have some mutual friends, or maybe you studied at the same place in different years, or you've visited some of the same place, or you have some of the same hobbies or some of the same interests. I'm just saying, do your research and find some common ground. Figure out what questions you need answered before you pitch yourself. I'm just saying, please do your research and homework and then cold call them and make it feel warm. That's the key to cold calling, is to make it feel warm. And when you make it feel warm by knowing something about them before you call, you make your cold calls, visits, emails, DMs, whatever you're doing, feel warm and conversational. I guess what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is let's bring the human part back into this world. Let's bring it back into business. Let's strike up conversation. Let's ask questions. For the love, let's just ask more questions. Let's find out their needs, their wants, their desires, the risks involved, and then we can pitch what we've got once we understand what's going on in their world. Don't fall into the trap of keeping cold calls cold. Let's warm them up just by doing our homework, by having a conversation with the human on the other end. Okay? Let's go back to being human beings and let's try to understand who we're serving in a deeper, better, less complicated way. Let's just have a conversation. And I think cold calling will be so much easier if you warm it up and introduce yourself and ask some questions and understand who it is you're serving or who it is you're trying to connect with. I'll step off my soapbox now. But I just thought this was an important topic to discuss here on the podcast and with all of you, because I literally get these terrible cold emails daily. I don't mean to be, I'm not putting the people down that are doing them, because I'm sure it works in some world, but let's be better than that. Let's have conversations. Let's make sure we do our research beforehand. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now. Have a great week. As always, I'm praying for you and I'm praying for your business, and I will talk to you next week.